Dawn broke slowly over the Arizona desert, the sky fading from deep violet into pale gold as the heat began its quiet rise. The woman tightened the strap of her worn saddle and rested her forehead briefly against her horse's neck, breathing in dust, leather, and the familiar comfort of routine. She had ridden these outskirts before, trusted the land more than most people, and believed preparation could tame even the harshest places. The desert, stretching endlessly ahead, offered no sign of danger, only space, silence, and the promise of solitude. She mounted with practiced ease and nudged the horse forward, hooves crunching softly against gravel and sand. The world felt suspended, as if time moved slower this early, before the sun claimed its power. She rode not to escape something specific, but to quiet the noise that followed her everywhere else. Out here, thoughts thinned, replaced by rhythm and breath. The horse sensed her calm, ears flicking, pace steady, loyal. As the dirt road narrowed into a faint trail, she paused, checking her water, her phone, the small pack secured behind the saddle. Everything was in place. She told herself she would be back before evening, long before the desert cooled and shadows stretched dangerously long. A final glance over her shoulder revealed nothing but open land and sky. No one watched her go. No one waved. The desert accepted her without comment. The sun climbed higher, and with it the temperature, but she pressed on, guiding the horse toward a distant ridge that shimmered like a mirage. The air grew heavier, each breath warmer than the last. Still, she trusted the horse, trusted her sense of direction, trusted the quiet confidence built from years of careful living. When the trail disappeared entirely, she adjusted course by instinct alone. Hours passed unnoticed. The landscape shifted subtly, rock formations replacing brush, sand giving way to hard-packed earth. At some point, the wind died, leaving an unsettling stillness. Even the horse slowed, nostrils flaring, as if sensing something the woman could not name. She spoke softly, reassuring words meant for both of them, and urged the ride onward. By midday, the sun burned directly overhead, unforgiving and absolute. The woman wiped sweat from her eyes and squinted at the horizon, realizing how far she had gone. Turning back seemed simple enough, just a matter of retracing steps. Yet when she guided the horse around, the land looked unfamiliar, identical in every direction. Confidence flickered, then steadied, though doubt crept quietly beneath it. She chose a direction and rode, unaware that with each step forward, the distance between her and safety widened. The desert remained silent, indifferent, as horse and rider moved deeper into its vast interior, carrying with them the fragile certainty that this was still just another ride. The woman felt the first hint of unease settle in her chest as the sun refused to soften. Shadows vanished beneath her, erasing any sense of direction. She considered stopping, resting, but pressed on, convinced movement meant control. Somewhere behind her, the last trace of the path disappeared completely. Ahead, the desert waited, vast and patient, as afternoon stretched on and the promise of return quietly slipped further away. Without knowing it, this choice marked the moment her disappearance truly began beyond all expectation. Night fell without announcement. The desert cooled only slightly, trading heat for an unsettling quiet that pressed against every surface. Somewhere beyond the empty horizon, a phone vibrated unanswered, then went still. At first, the delay meant nothing. She often rode long. She often lost signal. Concern arrived slowly, like a shadow creeping across a familiar room. By evening, the waiting changed texture. Messages stacked without reply. Calls went straight to silence. The woman's name was spoken aloud for the first time, not in panic, but in confusion, as if saying it might pull her back into reach. The house felt too still, every ticking sound suddenly intrusive. Outside, the sky darkened into a hard, starless blue. Morning brought no relief. Sunlight exposed the absence, sharpening it. Her truck sat untouched. The horse trailer remained empty. There were no updates, no casual explanation to soften the unease. What had felt unlikely the night before now felt wrong. Silence, once harmless, began to feel deliberate. By midday, questions replaced hope. Where would she have ridden? How far would she go alone? The desert offered endless answers and none at all. Maps were spread across a table, fingers tracing familiar routes, then drifting into blank spaces where roads dissolved into nothing. Each possibility ended the same way, swallowed by distance. Someone drove out to the trailhead she favored most. The parking area stood empty, tire marks half erased by wind. No footprints lingered. No sign pointed clearly forward or back. The land looked unchanged, almost peaceful, as if mocking the growing fear. The desert did not reflect urgency. It never had. By afternoon, the word missing hovered unspoken. It carried weight no one wanted yet accepted. Calls were made to people who asked careful questions, voices measured, cautious. Time was noted. Details were recorded. The calm professionalism felt unreal against the ache forming underneath it. As the sun slid lower again, the waiting became unbearable. Silence pressed louder than noise, filling every pause, every breath. Somewhere beyond sight, the desert stretched on, indifferent, holding whatever truth it had already taken. And as night approached once more, the realization settled in quietly but firmly. Something had gone wrong, and the land was no longer simply quiet. It was hiding her. She was not yet officially declared lost, but the waiting had already changed everyone involved. Neighbors spoke in lowered voices, careful not to alarm themselves. Someone brewed coffee that went cold untouched. Outside, the wind moved across the desert floor, erasing small signs that might have mattered later. With every passing hour, distance hardened into threat. The desert no longer felt vast and beautiful, but strategic, hiding heat, snakes, cliffs, mistakes, and time. As dusk returned, calls were made again, this time with urgency barely disguised. Coordinates were shared, plans discussed, resources weighed against daylight lost. No one said it aloud, but they all understood the truth forming beneath procedure. Every hour made survival less likely. The desert was patient, and patience was not on their side. Far away, unseen, the land continued to cool, storing the day's heat beneath stone and sand. Night animals stirred, following instinct rather than hope. Somewhere out there, a woman and her horse were no longer moving together, though no one yet knew it. The silence did not answer questions. It only grew heavier, pressing closer, promising that when the desert finally spoke, it would do so without mercy, and the waiting would turn into action whether anyone was ready or not at all. The next morning would force decisions no one wanted to make yet. Search efforts began with optimism that felt almost performative. Trucks rolled in early, tires cutting temporary lines through sand that would soon erase them. Radios crackled with controlled confidence, voices trained to sound steady even when certainty was absent. The desert greeted them without resistance, wide and open, offering visibility but no guidance, as if daring them to misunderstand its silence. The first hours were spent following logic. Trails she favored. Ridges she might have ridden toward. Places that made sense to people who believed preparation could outpace nature. The sun climbed quickly, bleaching color from the land and compressing distance into deceptive flatness. Tracks appeared, then vanished. Footprints broke apart under wind. The ground refused to remember. By late morning, heat reshaped everything. Water drained faster than expected. Shadows retreated beneath boots. Movement slowed, not from doubt, but necessity. The desert did not reward effort. It punished excess. Those who knew it best moved carefully, aware that urgency could become its own mistake. Searchers scanned for contrast, fabric, metal, unnatural lines, but the land absorbed difference easily. Questions surfaced quietly. Had she fallen? Had the horse bolted? Had she chosen to walk? Each theory carried weight, yet none held long. The desert allowed all possibilities, committing to none. It had no obligation to reveal sequence or cause. It simply existed, vast and indifferent, long before concern arrived and long after it would fade. A coordinator marked time, noting temperatures, wind shifts, daylight remaining. Numbers replaced hope. Probability crept into conversation, unwelcome but necessary. Survival windows were discussed without saying survival. The desert dictated the terms, and everyone knew it. Water meant life. Shade meant time. Mistakes multiplied faster than solutions. By afternoon, doubt hardened. Search patterns widened. Resources stretched thin. Helicopters circled, blades chopping air, their shadows sliding uselessly across stone. From above, the land offered no distinction, no sign of human vulnerability. Just texture and heat and scale. The woman's absence felt smaller from the sky, almost impossible to isolate. Those on foot felt it differently. The ground radiated stored heat, seeping upward, draining strength invisibly. Throats dried. Focus narrowed. Even experienced searchers felt the edge of disorientation, the subtle mental drift that came from exposure. The desert did not attack. It waited. As daylight waned, frustration surfaced. Voices tightened. The calm of procedure cracked under repetition. They had searched where sense pointed them. They had followed logic, experience, maps. None of it mattered if the land chose otherwise. Someone muttered what everyone already knew. The desert does not care who you are or how prepared you think you are. When the order came to pause for the night, it felt like surrender. Camps were set reluctantly. Coordinates logged. Plans adjusted for morning. The woman remained unseen, unconfirmed, unresolved. Darkness crept back in, cooling the surface but not the threat beneath it. Somewhere beyond the search perimeter, the desert held its position. Whatever had happened was already in motion, shaped by heat, fear, and time. The land would not reveal it easily. And as night settled over the vastness once more, a quiet truth emerged among those waiting. Tomorrow would demand more than logic. It would demand luck, endurance, and answers the desert rarely gives. She woke to pain before memory. Sunlight pressed against her eyelids, harsh and unforgiving, and when she opened them the sky felt too close, a white-blue weight crushing down. Her mouth was dry beyond thirst, tongue swollen, lips cracked and bleeding. For a moment she did not know where she was. Then heat answered for her. The desert did not ask permission. It reminded her. The horse was gone. That realization came slowly, drifting in and out with a buzzing in her ears. She pushed herself up on trembling arms, heart racing as she scanned the land. Empty. No hoofprints she could trust. No shade except a jagged rock casting a thin, useless line. Panic surged, sharp and sudden, but she forced it down, breathing shallowly, counting each inhale like an anchor. Day 1 blurred into survival math. She rationed water carefully, measured steps, searched for landmarks that no longer matched memory. The sun moved faster than expected. Heat distorted distance, turned hills into illusions. By nightfall, her water was half gone. She curled against stone, listening to unfamiliar sounds, repeating her name aloud so it would not disappear. Day 2 stripped certainty away. Thirst became constant, no longer sharp but heavy, dragging at thought and movement. She walked when she could, rested when dizziness forced her down. Shadows became shelter, even when they vanished too quickly. She spoke to the desert, bargaining quietly, promising things she could not define. No answer came. By the third day, time fractured. She lost hours, then found them again in strange places. Her thoughts wandered into memories that felt physical, as if she could step into them and leave the heat behind. She knew this was dangerous. She knew confusion meant decline. Still, she smiled at nothing, laughed once, then cried until her chest ached. The fourth day arrived without relief. Her water was gone. She chewed dry grass, sucked moisture from stones, knowing it would not help. Every movement felt deliberate, as if her body were negotiating with gravity. The sun burned deeper now, inside her skull, behind her eyes. She began to imagine sounds, hooves, voices carried on wind that did not exist. On the fifth day, she made a decision that felt calm, almost peaceful. The horse would survive without her. It would find water. It would move better alone. With shaking hands, she removed the saddle, stroked its neck one last time, and turned it loose. Watching it walk away hurt more than thirst. She lay down beneath rock and shadow, breathing shallowly, unsure if she would stand again. Hours passed in fragments. She drifted between waking and stillness, aware of her heartbeat slowing, conserving energy she no longer had. Ants crawled near her fingers. The sun shifted, briefly granting mercy as shade stretched and retreated. She whispered apologies to no one, wondering if letting the horse go meant surrender or hope disguised as loss. As evening approached, her thoughts returned to the sound of hooves, steady and purposeful, moving away from her. She imagined the animal choosing paths she could no longer follow, guided by instinct older than fear. Somewhere beyond her reach, it would keep walking, away from the heat that held her still. The desert cooled as light faded, but relief never came. She remained where she was, alive yet fading, while distance quietly closed behind the horse. By morning, she would not know how many days had passed. By then, something else would begin moving toward civilization, carrying silence, dust, and the first sign that she had vanished without taking everything with her. That movement, unseen and unquestioned, would soon reach human eyes, transforming absence into alarm, and silence into the first undeniable clue. It would arrive without explanation, just an animal where a woman should have been, forcing those waiting to confront the truth that survival sometimes separates companions, and that answers often return alone, long before the people they belong to ever do. When it did, fear would sharpen into certainty, and the search would finally understand that the desert had already made its first, devastating decision. Nothing after that would ever feel uncertain again. Not for anyone who saw it. First-hand witnesses. The first person to see the horse thought they were mistaken. It emerged slowly from the heat haze, head lowered, ribs visible beneath dust-caked skin, moving with the dull determination of an animal that had already traveled too far. At first glance, it looked wrong, incomplete. Only when it stepped closer did the absence become undeniable. There was a saddle. There were reins. There was no rider. The horse stopped at the edge of the road as if uncertain whether it belonged there. A truck idled nearby, its engine noise startling in the quiet morning. The animal flinched, then stood still, sides heaving, eyes dark and exhausted. Someone approached cautiously, hand outstretched, heart already sinking. The saddle was dry. The straps were worn from movement. No sign of a fall. No sign of blood. Just emptiness where a woman should have been. Word traveled fast after that. Faster than hope ever had. Phones rang with urgency stripped bare. The horse was identified within minutes. There was no confusion now, no room for optimism. Animals did not return alone unless something had gone wrong. Very wrong. The quiet that followed felt heavier than the days before, as if silence itself had finally chosen a side. Water was brought. The horse drank desperately, then lifted its head, ears flicking, as though listening for something no one else could hear. Its legs trembled, not from fear, but exhaustion. The animal had survived by instinct, by choosing movement over loyalty. That truth settled uneasily among those gathered. Someone whispered that animals know when to leave. No one argued. The saddle told its own story. It had been removed deliberately, not torn away. The straps were loosened with care. This was not panic. This was a decision. That detail changed everything. Search leaders exchanged glances, recalculating timelines, redrawing maps. If she had let the horse go, she had been thinking clearly. Or clearly enough to understand she could not keep both of them alive. The horse's path was traced as far as it could be. Hoofprints appeared briefly, then dissolved into wind-swept ground. The animal had not wandered randomly. It had moved with purpose, choosing terrain, avoiding obstacles, following something older than training. Instinct had guided it back toward water, toward people, toward survival. It had done exactly what it was capable of doing. What it could not do was bring her with it. The return transformed the search. It stripped away uncertainty and replaced it with urgency sharpened by fear. She was no longer simply missing. She was exposed. Alone. Without water. Every calculation tightened. Every hour gained weight. The desert suddenly felt closer, more personal, as if it had stepped forward and placed evidence in human hands. Those waiting watched the horse carefully, hoping for something more, some signal, some direction. But animals do not explain themselves. The horse stood quietly, a live proof of endurance, while the question it carried remained unanswered. Where had she chosen to stay behind? How far had she walked? How long had she lasted after letting go? As the sun climbed again, preparations intensified. New grids were drawn. Search areas expanded beyond logic into desperation. The horse was led away, cared for, protected, but its presence lingered like an accusation. It had returned because it could. She had not. Somewhere beyond the road, beyond the reach of engines and radios, the desert remained unchanged. Whatever decision she had made beneath that sky had already altered the outcome. The horse's return was not an ending. It was a message delivered without words, demanding response. And as search teams moved out once more, following questions rather than tracks, they understood something crucial had shifted. The desert had given them a sign. What it would give them next remained uncertain. The horse's return changed the questions, but not the answers. Search leaders gathered around maps and notes, staring at the same desert now marked with new urgency. The animal had survived. That fact mattered. It meant water existed somewhere within reach. It meant movement had been possible. It also meant the woman had made a conscious choice, one shaped by reason, fear, and diminishing strength. An animal behavior specialist was brought in quietly, their presence understated. They observed the horse carefully, noting dehydration patterns, muscle fatigue, and stress responses. The conclusion was uncomfortable but clear. The horse had not panicked. It had been released. Animals bolt when frightened. This one had been sent away. That decision reframed the entire disappearance. Search patterns shifted again. Instead of assuming a fall or sudden injury, teams considered prolonged survival. Shade became priority. Rocky outcrops, dry washes, and shallow ravines were added to the grid. Places people avoided because they were difficult to reach suddenly felt more likely. The desert rewarded those who stayed low and still. Speculation grew among those waiting. Some believed she had sacrificed herself so the horse could live. Others thought she expected to follow later and never could. No theory settled comfortably. The horse could not explain the moment it turned away, could not describe the heat, the fear, or the calculation behind that final act of care. The saddle told more than the animal ever would. Buckles loosened carefully. No torn leather. No frantic cuts. Her hands had been steady enough to finish what she started. That detail haunted those who understood it. Clear thinking under extreme distress was rare. It suggested she had held on longer than anyone wanted to admit. As the day wore on, tension grew sharper. Every hour without discovery pressed heavier than the last. The desert scale mocked human effort. From the air, everything looked possible. On foot, everything felt endless. Searchers spoke less now, conserving breath, focus narrowing to small details that might matter. The horse rested in shade, monitored quietly. It lifted its head at sounds no one else noticed, ears rotating toward distant movement. Some watched it, hoping instinct might still guide them. But whatever bond had existed between animal and rider had already fulfilled its last purpose. The horse had done what it could. Late in the afternoon, a tracker found something uncertain. A disturbance in sand near a rock line. Not a footprint exactly. More like hesitation. The kind left by someone stopping, turning, thinking. It was fragile evidence, easily dismissed, but it aligned with the horse's path and the timing. Enough to warrant attention. Search leaders stood over it in silence. This was not proof. It was possibility. And possibility was all they had left. The desert had erased everything else. Wind moved across the ground even as they watched, softening the mark, reminding them how temporary every clue was. Orders were given to expand outward from that point. Not far. Not fast. Carefully. If she had survived days without water, she would have sought shadow, not distance. The strategy shifted from pursuit to patience. As evening approached, hope returned in restrained form. No celebration. No promises. Just movement guided by what the horse could not say, but had already shown. Somewhere ahead, the desert held either an ending or an answer. And for the first time since the disappearance began, those searching believed the two might not be the same. Night would force another pause, but no one wanted to stop. Lights were readied. Radios tested. Plans stretched past reason. Somewhere ahead, Stone and shadow might be holding breath with hers. The desert had not answered yet, but it had pointed. Tomorrow would decide whether that gesture led to rescue, or merely deeper understanding of how close survival and loss can stand together before separating forever. For them all watching. In silence and heat. Alone now. Morning arrived without relief. The desert looked unchanged, but those searching felt the shift immediately. Fatigue sat heavy in shoulders and voices, yet no one hesitated. They moved toward the area marked the evening before, careful not to disturb what little the land had not yet erased. The air was cool for now, deceptive in its kindness. The first footprint was barely a footprint at all. A partial heel pressed into sand mixed with stone, its edges already softening. It did not point clearly forward or back. It suggested hesitation more than movement. A tracker crouched beside it, studying angles, depth, weight. This was not the stride of someone strong. This was careful, uneven, deliberate. More marks appeared nearby, scattered and inconsistent. Not a trail, but fragments. Steps that shortened, drifted, corrected. At times they vanished completely, only to reappear meters away, altered slightly, as if the person walking had changed with each step. The desert had begun breaking the story apart even as it was being read. The footprints told a psychological truth no one wanted to hear. She had been thinking, then doubting. Choosing, then reconsidering. This was not panic. This was endurance strained thin. Each mark represented effort spent sparingly, awareness fighting collapse. Someone murmured that she had been conserving energy. Someone else said she had been lost long before she stopped moving. The terrain grew harsher as they followed the fragments. Rocks cut into sols. Inclines punished balance. Shade existed only briefly, narrow and shifting. The kind of place few would choose unless forced. That realization settled quietly. She had not wandered here. She had come because the desert pushed her. Mid-morning heat returned with authority. Sweat-soaked clothing quickly. Water checks became frequent. The search slowed, not from doubt, but respect. Everyone understood now how easily logic dissolved out here. Even trained minds felt it tugging, subtle and relentless. The footprints grew harder to interpret as the ground changed, turning to compacted earth that remembered nothing. Then came the first sign of rest. A shallow impression beside a rock face, scuffed where someone had leaned or slid down. Nearby, a faint smear where fingers might have pressed into dust. No blood. No fabric. Just contact. Proof of proximity. She had been here. That fact hit harder than absence ever had. Voices dropped instinctively, as if she might still hear them. The desert seemed to hold sound differently now, swallowing words before they traveled far. Searchers spread wider, scanning shadows, cracks, narrow passages where heat retreated. Hope reformed cautiously, reshaped by realism. Survival felt possible again, but fragile. The footprints fractured further beyond that point. Some led nowhere. Others contradicted themselves. Circles appeared, then stopped abruptly. Confusion had left its signature. This was the point where exhaustion began arguing with instinct. Where survival knowledge competed with the body's need to stop. A tracker straightened slowly, face tight with understanding. She had been close to collapse here. The signs aligned too well to ignore. The desert had narrowed her choices until stillness became the safest option. That meant she would not be far. That meant time mattered more than distance. As the sun climbed, urgency sharpened. Radios crackled with updates measured carefully, optimism restrained. Search leaders adjusted grids inward, not outward. Ravines, rock shelters, dry washes took priority. Places easy to miss unless you believed someone was hiding from the sun, not moving through it. The footprints ended abruptly near a line of stone, disappearing into terrain shaped by shadow and erosion. There was no clear direction beyond that point. Just rock, angles, silence. But this silence felt different. It felt occupied. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. They were close now. Close enough that every step mattered. Somewhere ahead, the desert was holding its breath, deciding whether to release what it had taken or keep it just a little longer. The search shifted inward, not outward, as if the desert itself had drawn a quiet boundary. The terrain ahead was the kind people avoided instinctively. Sharp stone walls closed in unevenly, broken by narrow passages where sunlight reached only in thin, temporary lines. It was not dramatic or vast. It was overlooked. That alone made it dangerous. Searchers moved carefully now, scanning shadows instead of horizons. The heat pooled differently here, trapped and concentrated, turning the air thick and breath heavy. Radios were kept low. Voices dropped without instruction. No one wanted sound to be the thing that missed something important. Every crevice looked like it could hide a body or preserve a life. The decision to search this area had come reluctantly. It required accepting that she had not been moving forward, but inward, retreating from exposure. That meant abandoning assumptions about strength and direction. Survival was no longer about distance covered. It was about minimizing loss. Shade. Stillness. Time. Ravines cut through the ground like scars, some shallow, others deep enough to swallow sound. Dry washes twisted unpredictably, their paths shaped by rare storms and long patience. The kind of places maps reduced to lines, stripped of threat. On foot, they felt intimate and unforgiving. One misstep could mean a fall no one would see from above. Searchers spread out along the rock faces, checking spaces barely wide enough to crawl into. They found signs of animals first. Tracks droppings. Scrapes where something had rested. Life existed here, hidden from the sun. That fact mattered. Where animals survived, water or protection was never far away. The desert seemed quieter than before. Not empty, but contained. Sound didn't travel far, absorbed by stone and sand. Even the wind felt hesitant, slipping through gaps rather than sweeping freely. The search felt slower here, measured, as if everyone understood that haste could ruin the fragile advantage they had gained. Then someone stopped abruptly. A hand went up. Others froze in place. Ahead, beneath a slanted rock shelf, the ground showed disturbance. Not obvious. Not dramatic. But wrong. Dust was darker where it should have been pale. Pebbles displaced in a pattern that suggested contact, not erosion. Someone had been here long enough to change the ground. Crouching closer revealed more. A faint outline where a body might have rested. Fabric fibers caught on stone. A single footprint pressed deeper than the others. Weight shifted unevenly. This was not collapse. This was shelter. Deliberate and temporary. Hope returned cautiously, like a breath taken too shallow. No one spoke. They worked methodically, widening the search without breaking the moment. If she had chosen this place, she had done so with intent. It was hidden. It was shaded. It was exactly where people didn't look unless they believed someone wanted to disappear from the sun, not from the world. The sun climbed higher, but the rock face held its shadow stubbornly. Temperatures inside the ravine were marginally lower, survivable longer. That realization sharpened urgency. Time calculations shifted again. Survival was still possible. Barely. Radios crackled with updates sent in fragments, careful not to promise too much. Search leaders repositioned teams silently. Helicopters were held back. Noise would scatter dust, disturb fragile evidence. This was a place that demanded restraint. As the search pressed deeper, the space narrowed further, forcing single-file movement. The rock walls closed in like a corridor shaped by chance and endurance. Somewhere ahead, stone and shadow curved inward, hiding what lay beyond. The desert had guided them here by omission, by forcing attention where comfort refused to go. No one knew what they would find beyond the next bend. But every instinct said this was no longer a search driven by probability. It was a search guided by understanding. And as they stepped forward into deeper shade, one truth became unavoidable. If she was still alive, this was where she would be waiting. The space opened just enough to reveal her. At first, she looked like part of the ravine itself, her body angled into shadow, skin dusted the same muted color as the stone around her. She did not move. For a fraction of a second, no one spoke, no one stepped forward, because experience had taught them what stillness often meant. The desert had ended stories like this before. Then someone saw it. The smallest rise and fall at her chest. "She's breathing." The words broke the spell instantly. Movement surged forward, careful but urgent. Boots scraped against rock as medics dropped to their knees beside her, hands hovering before making contact, as if afraid the wrong touch might undo the fragile proof of life. Her eyes were half open, unfocused, tracking nothing. Her lips were cracked, swollen, barely capable of sound. She flinched when a shadow crossed her face. "Hey," someone said softly, voice low and steady. "You're not alone. You're safe." The word safe didn't seem to register. Her gaze drifted, pupils sluggish. When a medic touched her wrist, relief flickered across their face. A pulse. Weak, irregular, but there. Still fighting. They worked quickly, rehearsed movements unfolding without panic. Shade was reinforced. Fluids prepared. Vital signs checked again and again. Her skin was hot, dangerously so, but her extremities were cool, conserving what little energy remained. Every sign pointed to someone who had balanced on the edge for too long and somehow refused to fall. Her mouth moved. No sound came out. A medic leaned closer. "Can you tell me your name?" Silence stretched. Then, barely audible, a breath shaped into something human. Yes. It was the wrong answer, but it was everything. She drifted again, consciousness slipping like sand through fingers. When they lifted her slightly to reposition, she cried out, a raw sound that cut through the ravine. Pain was still there. Awareness still lived beneath the damage. That mattered more than anything. Someone radioed the update, voice tight with disbelief. "We have her. She's alive." The words traveled outward, carried by static and stunned silence. Somewhere beyond the ravine, people stopped what they were doing. Some closed their eyes. Others swore under their breath. Hope, restrained for days, finally broke containment. A stretcher was maneuvered into place, a slow, careful process dictated by terrain and fragility. Every movement was negotiated with the desert, which did not make this easy. Rock walls scraped fabric. Shadows shifted. Sweat poured freely. No one complained. As they prepared to move her, she stirred again. Her eyes found one face, then another, struggling to focus. Panic flickered briefly, instinctive and sharp. "Easy," someone said. "You're being rescued." Her brow furrowed. "The horse," she whispered, voice barely there. The question landed heavily. Someone answered without hesitation. "He made it back." Her eyes closed. A single tear cut through the dust on her cheek. Relief crossed her face so quickly it hurt to witness. She did not ask anything else. She did not need to. The carry-out was slow and brutal. Heat pressed in even as shade followed them. Each step mattered. Medics monitored her constantly, adjusting, responding, fighting the desert's claim with every meter gained. She faded in and out, sometimes murmuring, sometimes completely still, but the rise and fall of her chest never stopped. When the sound of the helicopter finally reached them, it felt unreal. Blades echoed against stone, violent and welcome. Dust erupted as they cleared space, shielding her face, guarding her airway. The world narrowed to noise and motion and urgency. As she was lifted, secured, and carried toward the waiting aircraft, the ravine receded behind her. The place that had held her, hidden her, almost claimed her, released her without ceremony. The desert did not protest. It never did. Inside the helicopter, monitors beeped steadily, fragile but present. Hands remained on her, grounding her, reminding her body it was no longer alone. As the aircraft lifted away, the ravine shrank into shadow once more. Below, stone and sand resumed their silence. Ahead, a hospital waited. Answers waited. And when she was strong enough to speak again, the reason she let go of the horse would finally turn absence into meaning, transforming survival into something more than endurance. Recovery did not come with clarity. It arrived in fragments, measured in sips of water, monitored breaths, and the steady hum of machines. Her body lay still beneath clean sheets, but her mind drifted back to heat and stone, replaying choices made when survival narrowed to seconds. Doctors spoke softly nearby, careful not to push, knowing memory returned on its own schedule. When she finally spoke, it was not about pain. It was about the horse. She asked again, as if reassurance might expire if not renewed. When told once more that the animal was alive, safe, resting, something inside her settled. Only then did she begin to explain, voice thin but certain. The desert had taken many things from her, but not the truth of that moment. She described the thirst first. Not the ache, but the way it changed thought. How everything narrowed to calculation. She knew how much water she had left. She knew how far the horse could travel without her weight. She knew she could not keep pace anymore. The numbers did not argue. They waited. Letting go had not felt dramatic. It felt necessary. She had seen the horse struggling, its sides heaving, its movements slowing in response to her weakness. Keeping it tethered to her would have been loyalty disguised as cruelty. Releasing it was the only decision that still gave one of them a chance. She remembered removing the saddle carefully, hands shaking but deliberate. She remembered the horse hesitating, confused by freedom offered too suddenly. She had spoken to it then, quietly, promising nothing except trust. When it finally turned away, she had not followed. She had lain back against the stone and watched until it disappeared, knowing that watching any longer would cost her strength she could not spare. Those listening understood then that survival had not been selfish. It had been divided. She had chosen to reduce loss, not escape responsibility. The horse carried help away because she could not. That truth reframed everything. The return had not been abandonment. It had been partnership stretched beyond proximity. As strength returned slowly, she spoke of the place she chose to stay. The shade that lasted longer than expected. The way the rock held cool beneath her palms at night. She admitted to moments of confusion, to talking aloud, to losing time. But she never lost awareness of why she stayed still. Movement would have killed her faster than thirst. The desert had forced her inward, stripped away pride and motion until stillness became strategy. Every instinct to walk, to search, to keep going had been weighed and dismissed. She survived by resisting urgency, by letting the horse carry it instead. When she finished, the room remained quiet. There was nothing to add. The story did not ask for forgiveness or praise. It stood on its own, complete and difficult. Survival had not come from strength alone, but from restraint. Later, when she was wheeled outside briefly, sunlight warmed her face without threat. Somewhere nearby, the horse stood tethered, a live proof of a decision made under impossible conditions. She did not reach for it. She did not need to. The bond had already done its work. Beyond the hospital walls, the desert remained unchanged. It had not softened. It had not learned. But it had revealed something rare. Survival was not always about holding on. Sometimes it was about knowing exactly when to let go, and trusting that what you release might carry your life forward long enough for answers to follow. The desert did not change after she left it. Days passed, winds shifted, shadows moved across the same stone and sand that had nearly ended her life. No marker remained where she had rested. No sign announced survival or loss. The land absorbed the story quietly, as it always had, keeping what it did not choose to return. From a distance, recovery looked complete. Her skin healed. Strength returned to her limbs. Doctors spoke of resilience, of odds beaten. But survival was not a clean line. It lingered in small moments, in the way she paused before drinking water, in how silence sometimes felt too loud. The desert followed her home, not as fear, but as memory that refused to be simplified. People asked what it was like out there. They wanted lessons, warnings, meaning. She gave careful answers, never dramatic. She spoke of heat, of shade, of listening to her body when instinct screamed to move. She did not speak of the nights when she wondered if the desert would let her sleep forever. Some truths were not meant to be shared fully. Some belonged only to the land that witnessed them. The horse recovered faster. Animals often do. Its ribs filled out, its coat regained shine, Its eyes lost the dull exhaustion they had carried back to the road. When she finally stood beside it again, hand resting against its neck, there was no ceremony, no apology, no gratitude spoken aloud. The bond did not require language. It had already been tested beyond explanation. Searchers returned to their routines. Maps were folded away. Equipment cleaned. Another name was removed from a list that rarely shortened. They spoke of the case quietly afterward, not because it was frightening, but because it was close. It reminded them how thin the margin was, how easily preparation could dissolve into vulnerability. The desert did not need mistakes to claim people. It only needed time. Life resumed its shape, altered but intact. She rode again eventually, though never as far, never without pause. She learned the sound of her own limits, respected them. The desert was no longer a place to conquer or escape into. It was something to approach carefully, honestly, without illusion. The place where she had been found remained unnamed. No sign marked it. No one returned to see it again. The desert preferred it that way. What happened there was complete. It did not ask to be revisited. In quiet moments, she thought of how close she had come to disappearing completely. How easily the story could have ended without witnesses, without explanation. The horse's return had been the only interruption, the single thread connecting absence to survival. Without it, the desert would have kept everything. That truth stayed with her. Not as dread, but as respect. The desert was not cruel. It was honest. It offered no guarantees, no mercy, no intent. It simply endured, indifferent to human hope or despair. Somewhere out there, stones still held the warmth of the sun, ravines still collected shade, and wind still erased what mattered. The desert kept its secrets, as it always had. But sometimes, rarely, it allowed one story to come back whole enough to be told. And when it did, the silence that followed was not empty. It was earned. She understood now that answers were never permanent. Survival did not close the mystery. It simply shifted it. What remained unanswered was not why she lived, but how many stories like hers stayed buried, unnamed, waiting beneath the same indifferent sky, beyond rescue, beyond witness, beyond return forever.